Okay, hi everyone, I'm Alex, and today I'm going to go through pedigree analysis for you. Let's start. Although this is a PowerPoint presentation, I have tried to categorize it into specific sections so that it's well divided up, and we're going to go through first the visuals in a pedigree, and then some of the theory to help us understand inheritance patterns. And once we have a good understanding of inheritance patterns, then I'll show you the steps to analyze the pedigree. So this is what it looks like. Whoops. This is what we're working with. These little, there's some shapes, there's some lines. Some are shaded, some are not, and they're in rows. We're going to start with the visuals. So I'm going to show you how to determine sex, how to determine a phenotype, where we can see relationships, and how carriers of disease are represented as well. Pedigree is a genetic representation of a family tree that diagrams the inheritance of a trait or disease through several generations. Sex is shown by shapes, so circles represent females and squares represent males. If they're shaded, it means that the individual is affected by the disease. If they're not shaded, it means they're unaffected. And this is what phenotype refers to. Relationships are shown with the following rules. So each row here represents a generation. Sometimes they'll be numbered as 1, 2, 3, sometimes not. But even if that's not there, it's fair to assume that each row represents a generation, okay? Do not assume that in each row, all of the individuals are siblings because partners are also represented in the same horizontal row, okay? Well, in the same row. The next rule is in regards to horizontal lines. So if there's a horizontal line between two shapes, that represents marriage. Or, in modern day, it's more accurate to say that it represents mating and producing offspring. If there's a horizontal line then above the shapes, that means siblings, but it will only be siblings if there is a vertical line that sort of corresponds to them. So, an example where you don't want to get tripped up is individual 4 here. Yes, there's a horizontal line above 2, 3, 4, and 5, but there's no vertical line, okay? So 4 is not a sibling, it's the mate of individual 3. Carrier representation. So sometimes, as you probably know, individuals can be carriers of disease but not express it. That will be shown in the genotype, which I'll explain a little bit more on a later slide. But the way that this is represented, sometimes it's not represented at all, as shown in this pedigree here. Sometimes it's represented by half shading a shape, and sometimes it's represented just by putting a circle in between, in the middle of the shape. So now that I've explained to you the visuals, let's have a go at these questions. I do recommend, I know you probably won't be bothered, but I really recommend for your learning to pause and have a go by yourself and then see if you make a mistake on one, because then it's likely that you won't repeat the mistake again. But I'm going to assume you had to go by yourself and go through the answers. So question number 1, the sex of individual marked as number 1. Individual 1 is a square, which we said is representative of a male. How many children did individual 1 and 2 have together? You can see by the lines, they're married, down, 1, 2, 3 children, okay? The relationship between individual 5 and individual 6 is marriage, okay? They're married or they're co-parents. Relationship between individual 5 and individual 7. So this is a circle, and underneath it on the pedigree is a square, a male. Okay, so this is mother and son. Which of the numbered individuals are affected by the disorder? So we said that shading represents affected phenotypes. And of the numbered individuals, individual 1, 2, 4, 5, and 7 are shaded. Therefore, those are the individuals affected by the disorder. Let's move on to theory. This is really important to understand so that we can assess inheritance patterns. They're pretty, I'm not going to say basic because genetics is complicated, but let's say fundamental things to understand. We'll go through karyotypes, so the difference between autosomes and sex chromosomes, sex determination and why that's important in inheritance of disease, and finally genotype, because that's important to know as well. The human karyotype looks different depending on whether you're a male or female. It consists of 23 sets of chromosomes. The first 22 pairs are called autosomes, and they regulate the somatic characters of the body. So, things not related to sex and reproduction. Okay. That's where the 23rd one comes in. Males have an X and a Y chromosome, and females have an X and an X. Good way to think of it is just, males have a Y chromosome and females don't. So for the first 22 chromosomes, for each one, you're going to get one from mum and one from dad. So then when it comes to sex, I'll show you here. You're going to get one from mum and one from dad as well. Now let's think about the possibilities. Because mum has two X's, she's obviously going to give an X, okay? Which X? We don't know. Dad, if he gives an X, we create a female child. If dad gives a Y, we create a male child. So for that reason, ultimately, it's up to dad what the sex is, okay? Because the mum's genetic material cannot decide that it's a boy. She has cannot decide it's a male because she has no Y, all right? Mitochondrial DNA is very important. This comes from a mother to all of her offspring, okay, regardless of sex, regardless whether it's a male or female. And only mothers can donate mitochondrial DNA because during inception, the egg provides the cytoplasm to the embryo, and the mitochondria are located inside the cytoplasm. When the sperm penetrates the egg, its mitochondria then disintegrate, okay? So that DNA is gone. So the embryo is left with, the sperm, the cytoplasm, and the maternal mitochondrion and mitochondrial DNA inside there. So that's why every single child will have, before sex determination happens, every single child has mum's mitochondrial DNA, okay? And this is important because, if a disease is primarily from the mitochondrial DNA, it's going to be passed down from a mother to all her children, and that's a good way to identify, that it's a mitochondrial disease. If a father is affected, his children will not be. Okay. Moving on. This is a picture. I think it's easy to explain it in words, but it's just showing that here in the nucleus, there is nuclear DNA, which is from both mum and dad. And then here in the cytoplasm is the mother's mitochondrial DNA. Okay. Genotype is really important to understand. It's the combination of alleles one carries for a particular gene, okay? And an allele is a version of a gene. It's written as letters, okay? There are many genes on the chromosome, but an allele is the type of version that the child got from the parents, okay? They can be dominant and recessive. We write dominant genes as a capital letter and then recessive ones as a lowercase letter, okay? And as you can imagine, if we look at these examples, if a child has this genotype, capital A, lowercase a, then it has one dominant allele and one recessive allele, okay? Given that they've got a dominant allele, they will express the trait because it dominates. If they have two dominant alleles, then they will still express it because they've got two dominant ones and there's no chance for it to hide. If there are two recessive alleles, the child will not display the trait because there's no dominant allele. However, if let's now think of it as if the trait was recessive, if the inheritance pattern was recessive, this child will be affected, this one will not, and neither will this one. However, if two parents with this genotype both give their recessive allele, then we'll have this child, and then the child will be affected. Okay? And we term what I was just talking about was heterozygote and homozygote. So if an individual looks like this, it's got one dominant and one recessive, therefore hetero, two types. If they've got two dominant ones or two recessive alleles, then homozygote, meaning same. Okay. Now, I think if that all makes sense to you, I think we're at a good position to start talking about the types of inheritance patterns, okay? These refer to the ways that genetic traits or conditions are passed down from parents to offspring, all right? For the first four types, there's a good formula here. The inheritance pattern will either be autosomal or X-linked, and it'll either be dominant or recessive. So you can have autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, X-linked dominant, or X-linked recessive. Okay. Then the final two, disregard this formula. The final two are a little bit more straightforward. If they're Y-linked, as you can imagine, because we discussed that only boys have a Y chromosome because they have XY, whereas females have XX. If the condition is Y-linked, it means that only individuals with a Y chromosome, males, will have will express the trait or have the disease. If it's mitochondrial, there's no sex bias. The offspring of each affected mother will express the trait or the disease. Okay, I'll go into a little bit more detail of each one. Let's start off with autosomal dominant. I hope we're doing okay. I hope I'm not going too fast. Or let's start with the first half of the trait. Whoops. Autosomal, not X-linked, autosomal means it's located on one of the first 22 pairs, okay? Not the sex chromosome. Because then the second part of it, dominant, means that the types of genotypes that will be affected are both heterozygotes and homozygotes. So capital A, lowercase a will be affected because they've got a dominant one, right? And homozygotes with two dominant alleles will also be affected, obviously, because it's dominant. Some of the rules are that both males and females will be affected with an equal frequency. So you'll see a pretty equal distribution on a pedigree because it's not on the sex chromosome, so therefore it's not sex bias. Affected children will usually have an affected parent because it's not likely to skip generations, meaning that on the pedigree, it's not likely that you'll see an entire row. You can, but it's highly unlikely that you'll see an entire row that is unaffected. When you will see an entire row that's unaffected is if you've got two unaffected parents because they will not. So if in one generation there are two parents which are not affected, then their children will not be affected either because they've all got lowercase a, right? So these children will all be lowercase or recessive. They won't have the condition. Now, a question that might come up is how is this kid unaffected if the parents and all the siblings are? Have a think about it, pause, and then yeah, once you've had a little think about it, then listen to the answer. The answer is that these two parents are likely heterozygotes, okay? And they could have given this kid like, capital A, capital A. Maybe they gave individual six, capital A from uh, dad, lowercase a from mum, because they both have a capital and a lowercase. This lucky fella, seven, probably got dad's lowercase, well, definitely got dad's lowercase and mum's lowercase. So unaffected. And so did this lucky girl. So when they had children, they were all recessive. Okay, so they don't have the trait. That is the answer to the question that I put here to ask, which is explain why unaffected parents do not have affected children. Let's do another question. How can two affected parents produce an unaffected child? Actually, I already answered it because they're both heterozygote and they both donated their recessive alleles to the offspring. Okay. Those are two questions that will probably come up if you're doing an exam on pedigree analysis. Okay. Let's move on to the next type, autosomal recessive. So now I feel like it should make a little bit more sense. The more we go through the different examples, the more you'll pick it up. It's like driving. Immediately you're going to be overwhelmed, but the more you do it, the more it'll make sense. Okay, pretty much like anything. It's not exclusive to pedigree analysis, but yeah, let's do a little bit of repetition. So it's autosomal, so it's located on the first 22 chromosomes. Both males and females will be affected with an equal frequency. You're unlikely to see a sex bias on the pedigree because it's not on the sex chromosome. The genotype here, because it's recessive, is going to be lowercase, lowercase, okay? Most affected children have normal parents, meaning that it skips generations. Give me a second to compute. Oh, okay, because It's pretty unlikely that like both parents are recessive because there are dominant genes. It's more likely that you're not going to have the condition than that you're going to have it, right? So heterozygous parents will not display the trait. But if both heterozygous parents give their recessive alleles to the child, then the child will be affected. Okay. So you're going to think, oh, the two parents aren't affected. Where did it come from with the child? It's because they both donated their recessive alleles, right? And it's not that donating a recessive allele is less likely, it's that it's a probability thing where when the dominant gene exists, the amount of, and this got to do with Punnett squares, which we'll cover in another video. When a dominant allele is present, there's a smaller likelihood that the offspring that are getting produced are going to have homozygous recessive genotypes. Okay, so that's why it skips generations. All right, two affected parents will always have affected children because two parents with homozygous recessive genotypes can only donate the recessive allele, therefore, all children will be affected. And close relatives who reproduce are more likely to have affected children. This is because, and you can see this here by 10 and 11 having a boy and a girl that are both affected. This is because, yes, it is rare to have two homozygous recessive parents, but obviously I need to stop saying obviously because it's not going to be apparent to everybody, especially if it's the first time getting this information. So I'm going to stop doing that. But if two relatives produce children, their genetic makeup is a lot more likely to be similar, right? So therefore, if there is an increased likelihood that mum and dad are homozygous recessive, therefore their children will all be affected because there's no dominant allele to donate. Okay, that's autosomal recessive. Let's move on. X-linked dominance. So X-linked traits are on the 23rd chromosome, which is the sex one here. The gene is dominant, okay? So the genotypes that will be affected for girls will be both types. So girls can have homozygous X and heterozygous X, regardless of which one they have, they'll be affected. Boys with a dominant allele for the X will be affected, but if they have a recessive one, if they have a lowercase x and a y, they will not, okay? Affected fathers will pass it on to all of their daughters because let's have a think about that, right? How come an affected father will pass it on to all their daughters? Pause and have a think. The answer is when we make a girl, regardless of whether, let's say mum is unaffected, so we get an X from her. If dad is affected, the only allele that we can get from dad if we're a girl is X. If we're a Y, we're a boy. Okay. If we're a girl and we get an X from affected dad, the only X that he has is the affected one. He doesn't have a spare recessive X like mum might. He's only got XY. If he's got the affected X, every single daughter of his is going to be donated that X, and therefore every daughter will be affected. Okay. So let's do two questions for this one. Explain why individuals 5 and 6 are not affected. These two here. Okay. They are not affected because individual 5 is not affected because he's a boy. So mum probably is heterozygous with a dominant and a recessive allele. So she probably got the recessive one from, sorry, he probably got the recessive X from mum. And he got a Y from dad. Okay, dad's not affected anyway, but still, he's not going to give an X regardless because he only donates Ys to boys. This girl, 6, she probably got a recessive X from mum. So mum is definitely heterozygous, okay? Because two kids here, or because a son is unaffected, the daughter is also unaffected. So heterozygous mum probably donated her recessive X to this one. And then obviously because dad's unaffected and he gave his X, this one escaped the trait. To put it into an actual answer, explain why individuals 5 and 6 are not affected. Individuals 5 and 6 are not affected because mum is likely to be heterozygous and individual 5 received the recessive X from mum and a Y from dad, and individual 6 received the recessive X from mum and an unaffected a wild type X from dad, from unaffected father. Okay. Make sure the answers are concise and clear. Have a think about it before you write it down. Let's do, oh, sorry, actually, I had one more question here. Explain why individuals 9 and 11 are not affected. 9 and 11. Have a think. What did I speak about before? Why will affected males never pass it on to their sons? Because it's an X condition, okay? Dad's affected because of his X. And when he makes boys, he doesn't give his X's to the boys, he gives Y's. Therefore, the daughters will have it, but the sons will not. Okay. Let's do X-linked recessive. We're doing well. If we're getting this far and we're not, panicking, and even if you have to watch it a few times. X-linked recessive, let's do that one. The trait is rare and it skips generations. Affected fathers will not pass on to their sons because of the same reason as the other one. They're not going to give an X to their sons. Males are more affected than females because as the condition is recessive, you need two copies of the recessive X if you're a girl. So the probability that a girl has two recessive X's is smaller than the probability that she's heterozygous and that a dominant allele is present. Because if you have capital X and lowercase x, you're not affected. If you have two capital X's, you're not affected. Only if you've got two lowercase x's because it's a recessive condition. Whereas with males, they have a higher probability because they don't need to have two copies of the recessive X. They only need one because they've only got one X, right? The other one's a Y. So therefore, if they catch the X, they will definitely be affected because it's the only one they've got. The final rule is that it's transferred from mother to son, never father to son. Why? X-linked recessive mum has two lowercase x's, two recessive x's. When a son is made, he gets his X from mum. So an affected mum only has a recessive X's to give, okay? So the son gets that one. From his father, he will only get a Y. So he has no chance to get a capital X to wipe it out. He's going to get a Y. But because mum's affected and she gives his X, he's affected. I hope that makes sense. That's also likely to be a question. Explain why an X-linked recessive condition is transferred from mother to son, never father to son. Let's do the final two, Y-linked inheritance and mitochondrial inheritance. Y-linked inheritance will only affect males because only males have the Y chromosome. These are the affected, these are the affected genotypes. So whether he has a dominant or recessive X is irrelevant because the only relevant chromosome is the Y. Therefore, a woman will never have it because she doesn't have any Ys. The rule is that affected fathers will pass on to all sons because fathers pass on their Y to all their sons. And mitochondrial inheritance, for this one, the genotype doesn't matter because the mitochondrial DNA is separate from the nuclear DNA. It doesn't actually have to do with the chromosomes. It has to do with the mitochondrial DNA, which is only inherited from the mother. So therefore, affected mothers pass on to all offspring. And there's no sex bias. Let's do two questions here. Why are females not affected by Y-linked inheritance? Pause. Because females do not have the Y chromosome. Why are individuals 11, 12, 15, and 16 not affected in the pedigree on the right? So individual 11, 12, 15, and 16. How come they're not affected by mitochondrial inheritance? The answer is because although dad is affected, mum is not. And they do not inherit mitochondrial DNA from the father, only the mother. Here is something not to memorize off by heart, obviously, because there's a lot, but here's something to refer to. What I recommend you to do is to get some pedigrees without answers or with answers, but obviously answers separate. And at the start, use this slide to work out the inheritance pattern on the pedigree. Do that for the first few, and then once you get a little bit more comfortable, try and do it without the cheat sheet. Now let's go through some examples. Actually, sorry. Let me now explain the steps. So there are two ways that you can go about it. You can use the summary table, which is, helpful obviously at the start to do it with, and then later try and have, the rules, try and be knowledgeable of the rules because you'll have to be for the exam. Another way is I'll show you a decision tree. Okay, this is a decision tree. This was actually developed by RMIT Uni. I'll start with this one and then I'll show you the other one. And there are pros and cons to both, all right? They're not, I want to make it clear, it's not definitive. So even if you see a pedigree and say it skips generations, it's not necessarily a recessive condition. It's not one size fits all with the rules. It's more likely to be a recessive condition. And the rules, favor the majority of answers, and they probably will reflect the rules a little bit more in the exams, but in real life practice, it's not the way it works. So with that in mind, let's just give it a go, okay? Let's have a look at this one. The 4 steps. First one is to check for mitochondrial inheritance. And this is a good one to do first because if it's mitochondrial, we can, rule out everything else. If all affected offspring from the mother are affected, and, if there's a family where dad's affected and mum's not, and the kids are not, then, it's a pretty good indication that it's mitochondrial, and you can just stop there. Next, check if there's a sex bias, and then see which sex-linked one is probably present. If there's not a sex bias, then we just figure out which autosomal inheritance pattern it is, all right? Like dominant or recessive. So let's start with this first example. Check for mitochondrial inheritance. So what are we looking for? If affected mum gives it to all her children, right? So there's affected mum here and here. All of her children have it, but all of her children do not. Mitochondrial inheritance is definitive, okay? So if these kids are unaffected, whereas mum is, it's not mitochondrial. So let's move on. Is there a sex bias? 1, 2, 3 females are affected. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 males are affected. So it's likely X-linked. What are the ones that are more likely to affect males? Probably Y-linked or an X-linked recessive one because they only need 1 copy, right? Whereas girls need 2. So which one could it be? It's definitely not Y-linked because females are affected too, right? And they don't have Y chromosome, okay? Therefore, it's probably X-linked recessive. And let's look at the rules here, right? Yes, the trait is supposed to be rare. And this is what I'm talking about where, don't get tripped up because the rules are not definitive. Why is it? I can tell you it is an X-linked recessive condition, right? Why is the trait not rare though? Because two affected parents are in the pedigree. Therefore, all of their children are going to be affected. Therefore, it's not recessive. However, a good geneticist will, consider that this family was not present. And if we look here, yeah, it is rare, okay? Skips generations in this case? No, it does not. Males are affected more than females? Yes, tick. This is probably the giveaway. Transferred from mother to son, never father to son, okay? Mother to son, never, oh, that's what never father. This is probably not the best example, but we know it's X-linked recessive, mostly here because because of the rules that the male is more affected than the female, and that it's recessive because 2 affected parents always have affected children. Okay, so that's a hard one. Probably not the best one to start with, but anyway, let's move on. I'll show you how to use a decision tree. After doing a few, this method's pretty good, but there's a flaw, okay? And I'll tell you what it is, but let's go through it first. So let's try and work out this pedigree using the decision tree. The first question it wants us to ask is, do all affected individuals have an affected parent? Who's affected? Here. Yep, affected parent, affected parent, affected parent, affected parent. Yes, affected parent, affected individual, affected parent. Yeah. Okay, so that tells us it's dominant. Do all affected males have an affected mother? Do all affected males have an affected mother? Yes. 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 Are all the daughters of an affected father all affected? Affected father? Daughter? No. Affected father? Daughter? No. No. Autosomal dominant, you'd think, right? No. No, it's not autosomal dominant. The decision tree is helpful, but like the steps, it's not definitive. Like the rules, it's not definitive, okay? It's not an autosomal condition, and it's a great exam question because the condition is actually mitochondrial, right? This decision tree doesn't even consider this. That's why I think it's good practice for the first question you ask yourself when you look at a pedigree is to be whether it's mitochondrial or not, okay? Here we've got an affected father, no affected children. Affected father, no affected children. Affected mother, all children are affective. Affected mother, all children are affected. Affected mother, all children affected. This one's less obvious because in the second generation, each mate, each like partner is unaffected. So it's not as clear that all children are affected because there's not like a big chunk of black, which is good indication of mitochondrial disease. But yeah, important to consider mitochondrial disease. Anyway, I started you off with two hard ones. Sorry, let's move on. Okay, let's do this one. This is the same pedigree, and I think I initially planned to just show you to use the summary instead of the decision tree, because if we use this method, then we would have straight away gotten that it was mitochondrial inheritance. So the message I was just trying to share was that don't rely solely on the decision tree or the summary of steps. Have a good understanding of both because, they're both useful they're both more useful in different situations, okay? Let's do this example using the decision tree. Do all affected individuals have an affected parent? Affected, affected, yes. Affected, yes. Affected parent. Yep, so it's dominant. Do all affected males have an affected mother? Affected male, unaffected mother. So the answer is no. Therefore, it's autosomal dominant. And yes, it is. That's the correct answer. Okay, let's do this one with the decision tree. Do all affected individuals have an affected parent? Maybe pause before I go through it and try and do it yourself and then come back and see how we go. Do all affected individuals have an affected parent? Affected? Yep, affected parent. This guy is affected, but we don't have his parents. Affected individual affected. Yeah, okay. So dominant. Do all affected males have an affected mother? Affected male? We don't know because we don't have his parents. Affected male, affected mother. Yes. Let's go with yes. Are the daughters of an affected father all affected? We've got an affected father, and yep, his daughters are affected, right? Yes. Are the sons of an affected father all affected? Affected father, son, no, son, no. No. Therefore, X-linked dominant. Okay? And yeah, it is an X-linked dominant trait. So this one's pretty good. I think this one's probably easier to use at the start. And then once you are more confident with your understanding of the rules, then maybe use the summary steps because ultimately when you do an exam, you're going to rely on the summary. You're not going to draw out this decision tree, from memory and then rely on it. Because if you accidentally, put autosomal recessive here and dominant here, then all your answers are going to be wrong. But I think the decision tree is good as a start just for practice, right? So another one, do all affected individuals have an affected parent? Affected individual, we don't know their parents. Affected individual, affected parents. Same here. This girl's affected, her parents are not, okay? So it's likely to be recessive. Let's talk about why that is just quickly, so we're not just going through the rules. Why is it recessive? Why is it likely recessive if an affected child has unaffected parents? We spoke about this a little bit earlier, but it's got to do with probability and Punnett squares, okay? It's good to watch the Punnett square video after this one if you can. So ultimately what it's saying here is it skips generations. So the question is ultimately why do recessive traits skip generations, all right? And that's got to do with probability, right? So it's unlikely that both parents give a recessive condition, recessive allele each if they're affected. If they're unaffected, then they're both heterozygous, so they both have a little x, right? These two are unaffected because they are either capital X, or capital X lowercase x. Both of those genotypes won't be affected, but the chance does still exist that both heterozygous parents donate their recessive allele to one of the kids. Let's continue with the decision tree. I just want the cogs to be turning. Don't just use the decision tree and, neglect to learn about it yourself. All affected individuals do not have an affected parent. The answer is no. So recessive. Does the trait mostly affect males? One, two, three, four males. One, two, three, four, five females. Pretty even spread, right? So the answer is no. Therefore, it's autosomal recessive. Okay, it's all about practice questions and don't be afraid of getting them wrong at the start. It's through that failure that you're gonna, learn and improve. So, it's a hard concept, but not impossible to learn. Definitely not. So yeah, see you next time. Bye.